the king calls a great council of lords, and he invites them all. He invites York, the Nevilles, and so on. But the Nevilles and York know that this is just a setup. There's no unity going to happen here, so they don't go. Instead, they go and start preparing for war, and that is the point really at which the summer of 1459 is when both sides start raising armies in earnest.
Hello, welcome to the first of 6 episodes on the Wars of the Roses. We'll be starting today with the Battle of St Albans in 1455 and the rise of York. Regular listeners may have already listened to our Causes of the Wars of the Roses episode. Links are in the show notes for that if you haven't. We'll be going all the way up to the Battle of Bosworth 30 years later in 1485 when Richard III definitely said, a horse, my kingdom for a horse." Joining me are 2 historians, Derek Burks, the author of The Guide to the Wars of the Roses, and David Pilling, author of Kingbreaker. Links are in the show notes. You'll get 2 episodes per week, and so hopefully we'll emerge from August with a superior knowledge of a conflict that was an early civil war and which formed England for the next few hundred years. All the great characters are here. Henry VI, Elizabeth Woodville, Queen Margaret, Warwick the Kingmaker, Edward IV, Richard III, and finally Henry Tudor. Please do share and like and subscribe. But in the meantime, it's the Wars of the Roses Part 1, The Rise of York. Derek, David, welcome to the podcast. And so we have Derek Burks, author of The Guide to the Wars of the Roses, which is now out on Kindle as well as hardback, and David Pilling, author of Kingbreaker, the first of a series, or actually this is what the series is called, of novels set around the Wars of the Roses. So this is this hugely dramatic, well, to me, hugely dramatic. Last time we were talking, and this, so listeners, just to remind listeners, we had 2 episodes on the causes of the Wars of the Roses. So if you're coming to this, not having to listen to that, I would recommend you stop this, listen to the causes of the Wars of the Roses, and you'll come back hugely well informed, knowing exactly what's going on. But it is dramatic. Where we left it, though, and I'll kick off with you, Derek, but where we left it was we had the first Battle of St Albans, and David described that clash as not the romantic view of a medieval battle with, noble men, not noblemen, noble men fighting each other. This was a really nasty battle amongst the streets of St Albans. Richard, Duke of York, wins this fight and takes Henry VI capture and kills Somerset, his nemesis. So, Derek, I think that sums up where the state of play. But perhaps you could just sort of give a rundown of where the House of York and the House of Lancaster sit after the first Battle of St Albans in 1455.
Yeah, it's a really odd situation anyway, because essentially, on the face of it, York has not only won, but is impregnable. He's got everything he wanted, and he's got the continued support of the Nevilles. He's got rid of his, as you said, his main rival, Edward Beaufort, Duke of Somerset. He's got control of the chief offices of state. He's got everything really. It's all going his way. But the problem is, as long as Henry VI is king, there will be the opportunity for others to influence him. So although it all looks really good for York on the face of it, pretty soon it begins to unravel in the next 2 or 3 years. I guess the other thing we should bear in mind is that what we're about to talk about was not actually inevitable. When you look back on subjects like the Wars of the Roses, you just assume they were going to happen, as they did. But there's nothing to say that the Wars of the Roses, as we know them, would have happened inevitably. It was something which emerged from the politics, rather like we were saying last time, emerged from the sort of gangster politics of this period. And so you kind of get St Albans is a break. It's a sort of fire break, and then gradually you get the old rivalries and new rivalries surfacing again. I mean, just as an example, he got rid of Edmund Beaufort, Duke of Somerset. He got rid of Henry Percy, Earl of Northumberland, and other lords at St Albans. They've got sons. They've got pretty peeved sons who are more than happy to answer the call to get revenge on what happened at St Albans. So there are people whose interests it's in to promote division, as well as people who are trying to sort of bring unity, not least Henry VI. It's an odd period, yeah.
So, David, was that an error of the Duke of York's? Is that he sort of took his bloodletting a little bit too far by essentially killing off these nobles, which is, the Percys are a serious family.
Mm.
And was that a bit of a mistake? Should he have just got rid of Somerset and then an addendum to that? Should he? Are we in a sort of Henry Bolingbroke situation? And this is both of you really. With he's got Henry VI. Why didn't he sort of just come out with it and say, "Well, look, Henry VI, he fell down the stairs. It's terribly sad, but he's no longer with us." Why didn't he just do that?
I think I mean Bolingbroke is a good comparison. I think if you look at what happened to Richard II, although Henry VI was a disaster as a king, he wasn't in quite such a weak position as Richard was back in 1399. And Bolingbroke is exceptionally ruthless. The sheer number of men that he knocked off around about the time of deposing Richard, even then though he had to spend his reign fighting. There was no security after that. He just about sort of clung on, but by the skin of his teeth. I suppose with the Duke of York, he's in a bit of a catch-22 because it's like, did he go too far or did he go far enough? Because even though he won at St Albans, that didn't give him carte blanche to just wipe out anyone who could potentially oppose him. Because he's got this problem of what he claims to be fighting for, which is to get rid of the evil councillors around Henry VI. Well, he could plausibly claim that people like Somerset and Percy, the senior members of those families, were evil councillors, but you couldn't say the same for their sons and their younger sons and their cousins. He had no justification for wiping them out. So I'm not as sort of sympathetic towards York as some seem to be, but I think he got himself into quite a difficult situation, and then his way out of it, although I'm going ahead of it, is to try and sort of go for the throne itself, which brings its own sort of problems.
Yes, but in the wake of Derek, in the wake of St Albans, he is appointed Lord Protector by Parliament, isn't he?
Yeah, he becomes Lord Protector again in November 1455, but this is not at all the same as the first Protectorate. This only lasts about 3 months, and it really is sort of engineered into Parliament. I mean, this is a time period where Parliament doesn't do much unless the Lords tell them to, or some Lords tell them to. So basically, before, Henry VI was literally unable to communicate. That's not the case in November 1455. It's very much the case that Henry's not very well. And in particular, we did mention before this dispute between two noble families in the southwest. And at that moment, that particular feud has come to the fore. And it's blindingly obvious to everybody that Henry VI won't be able to sort that out. So it's kind of a sort of convenient thing to do is to make York Protector. And then when that's all dealt with, he can resign, which is what happens. He resigns after about 3 months, and Parliament's dissolved soon after. So it doesn't really help York. Again, it's one of these things. On the face of it, you think, well, that's really good because he's in a very, very powerful position. But we mustn't lose sight all the time in this period, and for years to come, most of the nobility are not on York's side at all. They're on the king's side. So if you always factor that into it, whatever he does, it's an uphill struggle, really. He's got these really powerful allies, the Nevilles, but that's about it, really. Everybody else is really not on his side. They're not necessarily hostile, but they're not in sort of York's camp.
Okay, so really, because of that, he's in a very difficult position. He can't really make a move, but he does. I mean, a few years pass, and he goes for the throne, doesn't he?
Yeah, but that's a long way down the road. I mean, it's a big distance down the road, really, in
Oh,
terms
it's not in
of
the late 1450s.
no, it's 1460.
1460, yeah.
Oh, okay.
1460. And it's
What
after an
happens
awful
then?
lot has happened, really.
Yeah.
And I think, what happens not to spend too long on this bit, but what happens in the late 1450s is that you get this gradual move towards friction again between principally the Queen,
Mm.
and who's very keen to defend her husband and her son's birthright, and the Earl of Warwick, who she sees as the architect of her problems. And you get this friction building up. Warwick has become captain of Calais after St Albans. Now, that is one of the most powerful positions in the land. Calais has the only standing army that there is, and it's a power base for Warwick. But Calais costs a lot of money, and Queen Margaret's very clever because she starves Calais of money. She starves Warwick of money. He can't afford to pay his troops, so on and so forth. So she's getting at him, and he's trying to work out how he can counter that. And when he comes to London a couple of times, for example, in the late 50s, you get skirmishes breaking out between his men and her supporters and so on. So it's a fractious situation in the late 1450s. And the best example of how completely out of that Henry VI is this bizarre love day on March
Mention
in
that.
March.
Yeah.
Where do you want to
No,
mention
no,
that?
no. You carry on because it's brilliant.
Well, yes. I mean, with all this going on in the background, good old Henry VI, a peace-loving man, says, "Well, okay, let's try and bury our differences and all be together." And so he arranges on this love day in March. I think it's 1458, if I remember rightly. He arranges for all these rivals, the Queen, York, Northumberland, Salisbury, Warwick, they go arm in arm to St. Paul's in a kind of procession. And the king thinks this is wonderful. But all of those people know that this is not wonderful at all.
No.
And they are just putting a face on it. But really, they absolutely are at loggerheads by then. By 1458, I think you could say that, they're ready to resort, both sides are ready to resort to violence again.
This is interesting. So this Love Day, I mean, that kind of rather appeals to my sort of one team, one dream view of life. And so is it because Henry VI, as we discussed in the first part of our causes, is that Henry VI is a really nice guy. He's not one of the lads. He doesn't go around sharpening his sword and wearing armor. He sort of likes praying and things like that. So if he had been a little bit more tough on this Love Day and said, look, you lot, this is ending. I'm the king. You do as I command. Would it have been more of an effective Love Day? Or St Albans has caused this to go too far, and they all hate each other, and it doesn't really matter that they've all been brought together.
I was going to ask Derek, is this Loveday, is this an example of, at this point, Henry can still enforce his will on people? Like, he can make them do things in public
Better
that
put, yes.
yeah, that they don't want to do. I think it's York and Margaret. They're forced to walk arm in arm. They've got these terrible frozen smiles on their faces. They're like, which obviously they wouldn't do unless somebody was forcing them to, and that's presumably Henry. So he's still, even at this stage, after St Albans and all the disasters in France, he's still got this natural authority. So it's at this point that, you know, you're really screaming at Henry, come on, mate, sort this out. You know, don't let these idiots make a mess of everything. But of course he doesn't. So
I think there's a difference. I mean, I can imagine another king in a different circumstance bringing together rivals and almost literally banging heads together and saying, look, this isn't happening, right? That's it. Either of you step out of line, you're for it. But I think there's several things here. One, that horse has bolted. Nobody's going to pay attention to what Henry wants. But as you said, they do pay attention to the fact that he's the king. He's the anointed king. And what astonishes me about this whole period is how loyal people are to Henry VI, not just in the 1450s, but throughout the 1460s, 70s, or the early 70s.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Because, I mean, my usual sort of era is the 13th century and Edward I. And the idea that anyone would have behaved like this when Longshanks was king, it's just so strange, you know. Then you switch to like Henry VI, and it's just like, oh dear, no.
Yeah, and I think it demonstrates his lack of ability to deal with powerful people. He just can't do it, really. So yeah, Loveday becomes a facade. It becomes a nothing. But as you rightly say, they do as they're told up to a point, up to that point. But if anything, I think it just makes the resentment ever deeper, because here he is forcing them to walk side by side when they all know that they are very close to open warfare. Nothing's settled.
Yeah.
Hello, Ollie here. Please forgive my interruption, but I wanted to let you know that at Aspects of History, we produce a digital magazine featuring articles, interviews, short stories and book reviews of the best historical writing available. Authors featured including Ben Macintyre, Lucy Worsley, Andrew Roberts and plenty more. An annual subscription is available for only $9.99, that's pounds or dollars. Yep, you heard that right. That's 6 issues for under £10 or dollars. Head over to aspectsofhistory.com to subscribe, where you can also gift subscriptions. Now back to the show.
Okay, so you mentioned that, okay, hostilities are sort of do not resume, but there is this sort of uneasy truce between them. And then Richard, Duke of York, I guess, is it sort of, this is an unsustainable period of relative peace, and he thinks it can't go on. I'm going to seize the throne.
Well, what? No, not yet. No, this is the thing about this topic. Everyone thinks it's a battle for the throne, but not yet.
Okay,
we haven't got to that point, because at the moment they're all saying how loyal they are to Henry VI. Nobody, York included, at this point is saying, I want the throne. They're all saying, whichever side they're on, that they're loyal to Henry VI, and that continues for a little while yet. What happens is,
we're around 1458, the Loveday.
Yeah, 1458, 59, everything. I mean, all hell breaks loose, basically, because Margaret's been very clever. She has moved Henry and the Prince to Kenilworth. So instead of him being in London, where there are Yorkist advisors and so on, chief officers of state, he's separate from those, and he's under her influence and the influence of those who she deems loyal to him.
And that's it. Kenilworth was quite a major castle.
Yes,
I've visited it. It's wonderful.
Yeah, Yeah. I think they've just done something at Kenilworth, haven't they? Just renovated it or something.
Have they? It features quite prominently in your books as well, doesn't it, David?
Yeah, there was a major siege there in about 1266. But yeah, I visited a couple of years ago, and there's a big renovation project going on.
Yeah, I
It's
think they might have finished actually. I think that's finished.
yeah.
I haven't been there since.
No, but I mean, even like when you look at the ruins of it now, you can it's a massive fortress. So
Yeah,
and I think it was throughout the medieval period. So you can see why Margaret dragged Henry there.
Yeah, and it was closer basically to the sort of grassroots support in the north, which it meant that she's kind of created a divide, and she's strong in the north and the southwest, and York is strong in the southeast, and London in particular is a very good Yorkist stronghold. But that division really is just emphasized as the months go by, and at the end, well, not the end of 1459, but during June, I think it was 1459, the king calls a great council of lords, and he invites them all. He invites York, the Nevilles, and so on. But the Nevilles and York know that this is just a setup. There's no unity going to happen here, so they don't go. Instead, they go and start preparing for war, and that is the point really at which the summer of 1459 is when both sides start raising armies in earnest.
Okay, so what is Henry VI and his mental state at this stage? Because I know we talked about him in the first part of this series, but he's at least in communicate. He can speak. He can communicate now, can't he?
Well, I mean, Derek will know better than me, but it always strikes me that there's this confrontation at this point at is it Ludford Bridge or Ludlow?
Ludford Bridge is the bridge over the River Teign into Ludlow,
where the two armies confront each other, but Henry is actually, for once, he's in armor and he's in charge of his army, and this really brings to a head of what are the Yorkists actually doing? What are they opposing? Because the fact that Henry is visibly in charge of his own army, they've got the option of, well, we have to fight him now. If we if we actually attack or fight his army when he's in charge, we can't sustain this argument that we're not attacking the king directly. And so they scarper. York and Warwick and their supporters, they do a runner. They flee in all directions. And it just shows again, it's like Henry can be done here if you just show a bit of gumption. I'm not sure of Henry's mental state. I mean, whether they just managed to make him look good for 5 minutes. But it's just, even as a figurehead, the king is the king, and you don't attack an anointed king unless, things have got extremely, extreme.
Was that the high point of his reign? It sounds like it was the high point of his military career, but was that the high point of his reign?
In as much as he had a military career, I think you'd have to say. But it is. It's like and there's no bloodshed. There's no battle. The Yorkists just ran. So yeah, I mean, if he had gone over to France and put in an appearance, wonders might have taken place. But I think this is probably the last point where Henry has any semblance of control. After this, he just seems to me, they drag him out as a figurehead, but he's not really in command of anything after this point.
I think increasingly Henry, from then on, Henry kind of becomes just a counter in the game. I agree with David. Up to that point, his appearance alone was enough to drive his enemies from the field. There was bloodshed. I mean, the leaders disappeared simply because a lot of their troops had gone. Changed sides and scarpered as well. So that York and the Nevilles and so on, they thought, well, this is untenable. We cannot fight this battle, particularly with the king sitting there on his horse. So we have to go, because if we don't go, we're dead. Simple as that. But they leave the rest of their army camped on the north side of Ludford Bridge, and the Lancastrians basically just go straight through them into Ludlow, and they sack Ludlow. And it takes it about 20 or 30 years to recover its sort of economic ability again. But one of the lines I loved about the sack of Ludlow is that the streets ran red with wine rather than blood. I think they just got into everything, they were pilfering and, taking everything they could.
So rather than killing everyone, they just stole everything and
yeah, I think there was some resistance from the Yorkists initially, and then it just became a rout. And if you, as in any rout, if you got cornered and you couldn't get away, and there was a river between them, but there were bridges, you were in trouble basically.
Okay.
So a lot of them would just have disappeared, melted away.
And by this stage, after this event, Richard, Duke of York, is effectively in exile, isn't he? He goes to Ireland, doesn't he?
Ireland.
He goes to Ireland, yeah. Well, immediately afterwards, the king calls what's known as the Parliament of Devils, Parliament at Coventry, I think, where all of the Yorkist leaders are attainted and condemned as traitors. So from that moment on, it's hard to come back, because everybody, Parliament has declared them to be traitors. So feels like a kind of seminal moment, really, at that stage.
Yeah.
And as you say, they're all in exile. York and I think Salisbury's in Ireland with him, with Edmund, his second son, and Warwick is in Calais with Edward, Earl of March, who is York's son and heir, his eldest son.
So is this, are we, because I know it's sometimes difficult to really understand when the Wars of the Roses are underway. And I guess we picked 1455 and the First Battle of St. Albans, but this feels like it could just as easily be the beginning of the conflict.
I think it is, personally.
Yeah.
Right. I think 1459 is the beginning.
No, I was just going to say, I think this is like the tipping point, isn't it? I mean, the war was always sporadic. You got sort of flashpoints of violence and then nothing for 5 or 6 years. But it gets seriously nasty after this point, I think, and no way back. I think the Parliament of Devils, the Yorkists who were attainted there, they were actually described as the lords of times past. It's like that. They're still alive technically, but not for much longer.
So they've been written off.
They've been anathema. They've been struck off.
Yeah.
So, well, actually, York does die, doesn't he?
Not yet.
Oh,
not yet.
Right.
Well, yes. He's not got much longer to go, though.
Yeah, he's not got. He's on borrowed time, but.
So does he return from Ireland?
Yes, he does. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Derek.
Basically what happens next is this sort of limbo period in early 1460 when Warwick is in Calais, and remember I said Calais is a pretty strong place. If you were writing comedy sketches about this, you'd be choosing Henry Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, as your main character in his attempts to try and get Warwick out of Calais, because it's complete chaos, it's incompetence, lack of resources, the usual Lancastrian story, really. And
Somerset, his father was the one killed at St. Albans.
Yes. So basically, there's a standoff because the leaders of the traitors, as it were, are all still alive in early 1460. So, and they're very much active up and about. They're not licking their wounds and, oh dear, we better go away and hide. They're planning what to do next. So Warwick invades Kent with a force from Calais. I think Salisbury's with him as well, and certainly Edward, Earl of March is. He has about 2,000 men when he lands, and by the time he gets to London, he's probably got about 20,000. He gathers a lot of support on the way. And of course, the city fathers, as usual, faced with between a rock and a hard place, They initially say, "Oh no, you can't cross the bridges into London." Then they say, "All right, then, since
Yes,
there's
you
quite a
can.
lot of you."
Yes. Yeah.
And so Warwick effectively takes London, walks into London, which is a big blow uh, against King Henry, really.
I think
Um,
there's doesn't he go from there and confront the Lancastrians at Northampton?
yes,
And
yes,
there's a battle at Northampton, which is one of these typical battles of the Wars of the Roses, where it's won by treachery. I think it's
yep,
Lord Grey of Ruthin.
that's right.
He's supposed to be in charge of this defensive point that the Lancastrians are trying to hold, and instead he orders his men to help the Yorkists over the barrier. And this is another disaster for the Lancastrians. I think the Duke of Buckingham is killed,
Yes,
the
Buckingham was
Lancastrian
killed.
commander, and Henry is captured. And this is the sort of start of him being passed around like a sort of
Yeah.
unwanted Christmas gift. He's like, "Oh, you can have Henry. Oh, you've got Henry."
Is Richard
Yeah.
Neville ostensibly then in command of the Yorkist army in this battle?
Well, good question. He is effectively he's the prime mover. But I wouldn't discount Edward, Earl of March, really, because I think as a soldier and a general, he turns out certainly to be the more than the equal of Warwick. But just to pick up on what David was saying, the reason why that treachery is important is that Northampton was regarded as an extremely difficult place to take. It was well defended, the Lancastrians were dug in, and Warwick was expecting a really difficult struggle until he did a deal, as you said, with Earl Grey of Ruthin. And it was a brief affair after that, and because they were in the vanguard, as you said, they were in a good place to be treacherous.
And
To
what
have a
was the
really big
deal? Sort of
impact.
more was it money, booty? What was an important?
It was one of Grey's estates, wasn't it? Didn't Warwick threaten to confiscate it or
Yeah, I mean,
something along those lines?
when you get to the bottom of most of these things, it's all about estate. It's all about
Mm,
land and the holdings they have, and threats to that, and ways of improving that. So it's always about that with the Lords.
yeah.
They don't seem to care much about anything else, but
No.
yeah, I think so. Yeah,
I mean, the Greys are another interesting family. They're a bit like the Stanleys. They're very powerful on the Welsh March. And again, the period I'm usually study, the 13th century, these are direct ancestors of the man who betrayed the Lancastrians at Northampton. They were like this from the start. They achieved power through treachery and betraying everybody around them, and that sort of passed down the generations.
yeah.
I mean, I think it was Grey's father or grandfather who triggered the revolt of Owain Glyndŵr in Wales.
They were specialists in
Yeah.
treason.
So I mean, if you were, Buckingham or one of the Lancastrian commanders, you think twice about putting Grey in charge of the defence, but that's the way it
Yeah,
went.
I mean, we should point out that there are quite a lot of different Grey families, and
These are the Greys of Ruthin.
yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And
So,
in case anyone's
mm,
thinking there's a connection later on with other Greys that
mm,
materialize. Yeah, I mean it's chaos as usual, and of course the death of Buckingham is significant in a way because he was always one of those who was trying to broker peace, and the fact that he was in the Lancastrian camp at all tells you that everyone had had to make a decision. They'd had to opt for one or the other by this time, and he decided he had to go with the king, as almost all the nobility did.
yeah. Another one would be the Earl of Oxford, who the 12th Earl, who up until this point hadn't really come down on anyone's side and
No,
been very, very neutral. But it's at this time that he chooses a side. He chooses wrongly. He decides to support Henry, and he is executed according to some accounts with absolutely barbaric cruelty. It's even worse than hanging, drawing, and quartering. They use some weird machine to drag his entrails out. And the same thing to his eldest son, Aubrey. And you wonder why this level of violence and savagery really starts to come to the fore after about sort of the period we're talking about, 1460, it's the noble families really start predating on each other in a way that I don't think you've really seen before. It's quite strange. It's quite sort of weird to read.
Yeah, I do think it really starts with St Albans, to be honest. I really do think that what was done there was seen at the time to be out of order, and things that happen after that are to do with payback one way or the other.
Yeah, it's a cycle of violence and
yeah.
blood feud.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening. Links are in the show notes. Please share with friends and family. And if you want to get in touch, you can through X or email history@aspectsofhistory.com. But until then, thank you and good night.